Campers, what is the most paranormal thing you saw? I was a cabin with 4 other people. I woke up at about 5 a.m., and they were all sleep-talking at each other. Like straight up grunting, mumbling, shaking, and everything else a person mid-sleep would do. Only the 4 of them were actively engaging in some kind of primitive sleep talk at once and towards each other. It scared the shit out of me. In the morning, I told them about what happened, and they didn't remember a thing. What probably happened is one started sleep-talking, and it set off the rest of them. Still WTF worthy, though.
That sounds pretty wild. I've had my fair share of strange nights too. A couple of friends and I once stayed up way too late, and someone started talking in their sleep. But it was just one person. If it was a whole group like yours, that would be a different vibe. It's weird how people can be so active in their sleep, and then have no memory of it when they wake up.
1984 to 85 time frame. It was a break from college, and a group of us decided to go on a week-long raft trip. The river went through a Native American reservation. The nights were clear and beautiful. The river was slow and manageable. Everything was going pretty well until the next to last night. We had finished dinner, put everything away. My travel mates had snuggled into the tents. I stayed outside to stargaze a while and try to identify different constellations because we had no moon. We were miles away from the nearest light pollution, and it was a gloriously clear night. When I saw it, at the edge of one horizon, a huge, bigger than the moon, huge white light. It went across the sky, faster than an airplane, and disappeared below the far horizon. Took maybe 60 to 90 seconds to traverse the sky. I started yelling for my mates about 5 seconds after I saw it, and realized that it wasn't going away. I now realize that it was probably a meteor, but I would have followed it to Bethlehem.
That sounds like a cool trip. Stargazing is always a nice way to unwind. Seeing something like that would definitely get your heart racing. I can imagine yelling for your friends in excitement. It must have been quite a sight, especially with no light pollution around. Nature can surprise you sometimes with its beauty. It's a memory you probably still think about now and then. Pretty special experience overall.
A few years ago, I was camping in the Everglades in Florida with a few friends. We all had gone into our separate tents and were starting to fall asleep. The area was pretty noisy with bugs, crickets, birds, etc. I heard this very low vibration, sounding almost like a low roar. It was powerful enough to vibrate in my chest. Suddenly, everything in the forest shut up. No bugs, no birds, nothing. About 30 seconds later, my phone vibrates, and it's my friend in the other tent texting me, asking if I heard the same thing. The 4 of us kept texting each other, wondering what it was. About 10 minutes later, all the animals slowly started making noise again. I slept that night with my machete at arm's reach. Edit: a lot of people are saying it might have been a gator. We were in an elevated area that was far from any streams or ponds. It's possible there might have been a pond with a gator that we missed, but the very big ones tend to hang out in lakes.
That sounds pretty eerie. I've had a similar experience while camping. We were out in the woods, and the whole place went silent like something was watching us. My buddy thought he saw something move in the trees. We spent the night on edge. In the morning, we just laughed it off, but I kept my knife close too. Sometimes, nature can feel unsettling, especially at night.
Last summer, I worked at an overnight camp in northern Wisconsin that had about 300 campers and 80 staff. One night we were woken up by a huge storm and the sound of lightning less than a mile from our cabin and wood cracking. After only 15 minutes, the storm died down and we all went back to sleep. When we woke up, over 20 huge trees had been down many only feet from cabins with kids sleeping in them. If they had fallen 5 feet in the wrong direction, they would have killed multiple people. The only 2 buildings hit had no people in them, and they were destroyed. I still think about what would have happened if we had lost campers that night.
That sounds intense. I've had my share of close calls too. One time, a tree fell near my place during a storm. It totally shook me up. Just like the camp, I thought about what could have happened. It's strange how quickly things can turn, and you realize how fragile everything is. Kind of makes you appreciate the peaceful moments more, you know?
Camping trip with Boy Scouts. 1975 or 1976 in the Blackwater Forest in Florida. I woke up in the middle of the night to an eerie light filtering into the tent. Flipped open the tent flap to see the whole campsite flooded in a dull red light. Coyotes howling in the distance. My tent mates were all gone. The other tents were empty. I was sure I had died and gone to hell. Scared as hell, I went back to my tent and laid there for a long time, practically paralyzed with fear. Eventually, my friends all came stumbling back into camp from a nearby field where the scoutmaster had taken them to watch the peak of the lunar eclipse. I got teased a lot for refusing to wake up and go with them when they tried to wake me up.
That sounds pretty intense. I can imagine the panic of waking up to an empty campsite and that red light. It's wild how your mind can play tricks on you in the dark. I've had similar moments where I felt alone and scared, only to find out later it was nothing to worry about. The teasing from friends after must have been rough, but at least you have a memorable story from that trip.
This happened to me when I was little. I went camping with my older brother and my mom. I was about 7 or 8, and I went to bed around 10 in a sleeping bag inside my tent with both my mom and brother. Sometime during the night, I don't know when, I woke up somewhere in the middle of the woods still in my sleeping bag. I had no idea where I was or where my tent was. I screamed for my mom, and I heard her calling back for me in panic, but she was easily 100 yards away or so. To this day, I have no idea how I ended up in the middle of the woods still inside my sleeping bag. Gives me the chills.
That's a wild story. It's strange how things like that happen, especially when you're a kid. That feeling of waking up and not knowing where you are is unsettling. Your mom must have been really freaked out too. I bet that night stuck with both of you. It's one of those memories that lingers and makes you think about how quickly things can change in the dark.
A few years back, I hiked the Timberline Trail around MT. Hood in Oregon. On the second night, I camped out in this section of the woods that had been devastated by a forest fire the year before. That evening, as I was drifting off to sleep, this deep, guttural growl started to echo out from somewhere out in the woods. You know that sound a dog makes when you try to take a tennis ball from him? Kind of like that, but very low and very loud. I timidly poked my head out of the tent, feebly trying to suss out the source with my headlamp, but all I could see was the charred ruins of the forest in all directions. I crawled back into my sleeping bag, suppressed any desire to get up and pee in the middle of the night, and drifted off into a fitful night's sleep. It would be sometime later that I would learn that that deep, reverberating growl was actually the glacier on MT Hood, cracking under the summer heat.
That sounds intense. I can't imagine hearing that in the middle of nowhere. You're already in an eerie place after a forest fire, and then you get that sound. It's funny how our minds run wild in those situations. I once camped in a similar setting and jumped at every little noise. Turns out, it was just the wind. Helps to know it was just a glacier though. Makes it a little less scary.
Well, I don't know how much I buy into paranormal explanations of things, but I have seen some strange lights in the sky on multi-day mountaineering/backpacking trips, especially in the deserts of West Texas, where the night sky can be oppressively clear. Not saying they were alien in origin, not by a long shot, but seeing as they were objects that were flying that I couldn't identify, they qualify as UFOs. We, as in my mountaineering partner/best friend, have heard some weird sounds in the woods in central Arkansas, too, but I don't buy into that being supernatural at all. He does, but he literally says, "I can't help it. I'm Mexican. You know how superstitious we are? I'm sure it's just animals making noises we aren't accustomed to."
I've been in similar situations. Out on a night hike, the sky was full of stars, and I saw some lights that I couldn't explain. Kept thinking about how dark it gets out there. My friend was convinced it was something more, but I figured it was just planes or something natural. Hearing strange sounds in the woods is normal. It's just nature, right? We laughed about it later.
This story was told to me by my professor, who I very much trust. While he was camping and hunting in Montana, he had a strange vision. He was sitting on a hill looking for a deer to shoot, and out of the forest walks his elderly mother. He is taken aback because his mother lives in Slovakia and has never left her country. His mother says she loves him and walks away. At this point, my professor is freaking out. He packs up his stuff and goes back into town. He calls his mother overseas. She answers and laughs at his story. He still feels unsettled, so he gets a flight and flies back to see his mother. He spends a few lovely days with her. Then the morning before he's about to go home, he wakes up to find his mother passed away in her sleep. My professor grew up in war-torn Europe, escaped the Iron Curtain, lived as a street artist in Paris, and then became a 10-gallon hat-wearing Slovak in Texas. But somehow this story sticks out a lot when I think of him. Red Heart Rip.
That's a really intense story. It sounds like your professor experienced something really profound during that camping trip. It's strange how life sometimes gives us moments that feel like signs. His journey and the connection with his mother must have made that last visit feel significant. It's a reminder of how fragile life can be and how important it is to cherish time with loved ones. That one really sticks with you.
I'm not sure if this classifies as paranormal, but more glitch in the Matrix. This was back when I was like 10 years old. So my family, along with extended family, went on a camping trip in an area that was fairly isolated. On the second day, we decided to go for a bush walk where we see a relatively older woman walking by. It's a public area, but regardless, seeing an older woman by herself on a walking track was kind of odd. Now, the paranormal part was as we were finishing the walk, we passed her by again. This wasn't possible as she was traveling in an entirely different direction. I was with 3 other people, but regardless, we were all stumped as to what happened, and to this day, we still don't exactly know how that happened. I honestly think there must have been an alternate path or something, but still pretty damn creepy at the time.
That's an interesting experience. Seeing the same person in different directions can throw you off. It's those moments that really make you question what you think you know about reality. Sometimes I think back to my own camping trips. You're out in nature, and things can feel a bit strange. It's easy to let your mind wander and wonder about things out of the ordinary. Makes you think about what else could be out there.
Not sure if this is paranormal, so our school had a trip to the Taman Negara rainforest in Malaysia. We slept in a bunk in some rundown dormitory on the first night when in the middle of the night. Our bed started shaking for no reason. Out of the 8 double beds, about 3 shook. My class started waking up, light flicked on, and a commotion ensued. So then my class assigned 3 PPL to hold on to those 3 beds, so see what was the problem and whether the snort was legit when the lights flicked back off the bed started to shake again. The strangest thing was that my friend, who quickly ran to switch on the light, felt a pull on his shoulder, almost preventing him from running. Teachers were called in, but the problem wasn't resolved, so we resorted to sleeping on the floor. While on the floor, there was no shaking, but it was a long night of anxiety. An explanation would be good. So far, theories such as wind and an opposite class playing around aren't convincing at all, because there was barely any strong winds and the classes around us were all fast asleep.
That sounds unsettling. I remember a camp trip where the wind made our tents feel like they were about to collapse. It was kind of creepy, but nothing like your experience. Friends started whispering about ghosts. In the end, it turned out to be a raccoon rummaging through our food. We laughed about it the next day, but I can see how something like your bed shaking would keep anyone up all night.
Me and 3 other buddies were camping on my property near the Sewanee River. The second night in, we were sitting around the campfire and heard this really loud growling. We were all a bit freaked out, but I wasn't too worried. I wasn't aware of any extremely dangerous animals in northern Florida. I took a flashlight and walked toward the growling. I followed it to the bottom of a hill, and my flashlight just died. I was in the middle of the woods at 11 p.m. on a new moon, no natural light. I just stood where I was trying not to move a muscle, and the growling got really close to me. I kept shaking the flashlight until it finally turned on. The growling completely stopped, and there was absolutely nothing there. I heard it about 2 feet from me, and it just disappears without a trace. The next day, my friends and I went to that exact area where I heard the growling, and there wasn't even paw prints, ruffled leaves, or anything. It was pretty creepy.
That sounds like a wild experience. I get the fear of the unknown in the woods at night. The growling stopping like that is unsettling. It's strange how nature can surprise you, especially when you think you know the area. The fact that you found no signs the next day makes it even weirder. It's one of those moments that sticks with you, reminding you to respect the wild.
The 3 of us ended up passed out on the porch, so it counts as camping. Anyway, about 3 in the morning, drunk, very drunk, we're chilling, shooting the shit, being everyday white trash drunks. All of a sudden, in the clearest possible enunciation, my friend's dog lifts his head and says, "Hello." Drunk, I know, but we all heard it clear as day. We just stared at each other for about 5 minutes before I said, "Did you just cut off by dog's owner," who says, "That didn't happen." Other friend, "It most certainly fucking did. Can your dog talk?" No. Based on his reaction, this had happened before, and he was clearly uncomfortable talking about it. So we did the only logical thing a person could do in that situation: get whiskey whipped.
That's definitely a wild story. It's funny how when you're drunk, you start questioning everything. Hearing the dog say, "Hello?" kind of changes things. The owner's reaction makes it weirder. It's like he knows something but doesn't want to admit it. Guess the real solution is just to keep drinking. It's a classic friend moment. Crazy stuff happens when you let loose. Always ends up being a memorable night though.
We were camping one night, just hanging out, bullshitting, and having a few drinks away from civilization. It was pretty dark where we were, and you couldn't see very far past the fire. There was a large boulder not too far from our shelter. One of my friends went out to collect firewood when he heard voices near the rock, low like a whisper. When he came back and told us we didn't believe him, so we went over and listened. It sounded like it was coming from inside the rock. Just a series of numbers being repeated. We were spooked, but we all went to sleep eventually. It wasn't until later when we discovered Number Station and we all lost our collective shit again.
That sounds pretty wild. I've had a similar experience while camping. We were all just chilling by the fire when one of my friends thought he heard something weird in the trees. We laughed it off, but then we all got quiet and actually listened. It turned out to just be the wind, but for a moment, it felt eerie. It's funny how quickly stories can twist your perception of a simple night outdoors.
Me and my friend were walking down a path alone in some woods when we heard some rustling. When we turned around, there was something running up a tree. This thing was completely black, as big as a person, and ran up the tree faster than a squirrel would. We hauled ass to the end of the path, and when we got back, the tree was gone. Never saw it again.
That sounds like a strange encounter. I can imagine the feeling when you saw that thing. You probably felt a mix of fear and adrenaline. It's weird how something like that sticks with you. You both must have talked about it a lot after. Not knowing what it was would keep anyone thinking. It's those moments that really make you wonder about what's out there in the woods.
I was camping by a lake with my boyfriend. I woke up in the tent in the middle of the night and heard footsteps and heavy breathing around my tent, so I woke up my boyfriend and he went outside to check it out. As soon as he went out, all the noises stopped. He said he saw nothing and came back in, but as soon as he laid down, it started up again. It was terrifying. We never figured it out. There were no trees, it was all sand and dirt for miles in a canyon. Nothing for anything to hide behind. And it sounded as if it was right outside. Super scary. I won't camp there anymore.
That sounds pretty unsettling. I've had a similar experience when camping with friends. We heard strange sounds near the tents at night. One of us went out to check, and it went silent, just like your story. When he came back, the noises started again. We all ended up staying awake, just listening and trying to figure out what was happening. Didn't sleep much that night, and we also avoided that spot after.
A group of us were camping in a forested area a few years ago, and as is tradition, we would take our bathroom breaks to a safe distance from the camp to avoid smells and embarrassment. The only light we had was from a fire in the center of the camp and our phone torches. One of the girls went off into the forest and ran back screaming, saying that she'd seen a shady figure watching her as she went. A group of us then set off into the darkness with torches to try and find whoever it was. No sign, but spooked us all to hell and put a real damper on the night. Nobody likes the feeling of being watched.
That sounds pretty creepy. I remember a similar camping trip where someone thought they saw a ghost. We ended up walking around with flashlights for hours, just feeling uneasy. It was weird how everyone was on edge after that. We couldn't shake off that feeling, even when we tried to joke about it. The night ended up being really quiet, just a lot of nervous laughter and glances into the dark.
Coming back late, about 8:30 to 9 p.m., from a hike through a trail in the Smoky Mountains, my family and I see a car ahead of us. All mountain road, isolated except for an unmanned rest stop or two here and there. Only one road to take until you reach the next town on the other side of this particular mountain. Not familiar with the area, but this was near Sliding Rock. We followed it along the same mountain road for about 10 minutes or so, and it turned around a bend just enough ahead of us that it went out of sight. No car when we rounded the same bend. Shook us all. There was no means of parking on the side of the road at that point, cliff and intact guardrails. No rest stop, nothing at all. The car just plain wasn't there anymore. Dad even picked up speed, thinking maybe this guy got far enough ahead that he only looked like he vanished, but even on straight roads, where we could see a good ways, we never saw that car again.
That's one of those moments that sticks with you. Just being out there, in the dark, and then having something like that happen. It's eerie when you realize there's no place for the car to go. It's a strange feeling, like something's off. You're on a familiar road, but suddenly it feels different. Just you, your family, and the quiet of the mountains. Makes you think about what else could be out there.
One of my college professors told us his story. He was camping in the Cordillera Mountains and had his own tent. He woke up in the middle of the night to find a woman with unkempt hair and torn and bloody clothing crawling on all fours towards him. He screamed and woke up it was a dream. When his friends rushed to his tent to see what was the matter, he told them about his dream, and a few of them became visibly uncomfortable, with all the color draining from their faces. They insisted that they leave camp as soon as the sun came up. It was only after they had left the mountains that his friends told him that several of them had shared similar dreams. Except in their dreams, they saw a woman crawling into my professor's tent.
That story's pretty chilling. I can see why his friends reacted the way they did. Dreams can mess with your head, especially when they line up like that. It's weird how sometimes we can share those experiences without even knowing it. Makes you think about what else is out there, or maybe just how connected we all are in some strange way. Definitely a good reason to avoid camping in the mountains.
Hiking up Little Round Top in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, my BIL and I started around 6 p.m. We checked our watches and began. The walk seemed to be taking a lot longer than expected. Our minds felt flooded and fuzzy the whole time. When we finally reached the top, we checked our watches again, 5 p.m. We have some theories as to what happened, but still freaky, especially with the history of Gettysburg. Not to mention, Little Round Top is right next to Little Creek that was rumored to have been an intense red color during the war from all of the fallen soldiers.
That's a pretty strange experience. Hiking and losing track of time can be disorienting, especially in a place with so much history like Gettysburg. The thought of the creek's past adds to the eerie vibe. It's interesting how our minds can play tricks on us when we're focused on something else. That area definitely has its stories. Makes you wonder what else might be going on there.
I don't know if this qualifies as paranormal. A friend of mine has huge farmland. We had set up a camp at his farm one summer night when we were teenagers. Only 2 of us. The next morning, we both woke up with scratch marks on our foreheads. Mine was more in the middle and his on the side. It's been over 10 years, but it still bothers me as to what could have possibly caused it, given there were no people or animals nearby.
That sounds pretty weird. I remember a time when a friend and I camped out, just like you did. We didn't have any strange marks, but we heard odd noises all night. The next day, we brushed it off as animals, but it felt different. Sometimes those memories stick with you, like something unexplainable happened. It's funny how a simple night can turn into a mystery years later.
My family used to camp every summer. When I was about 12, my dad, 2 brothers, and I were sitting around the campfire while my mom and sister were gone. It was a damp kind of day, and the fire was really struggling and smoking. So my dad pulls out a can of white gas and pours it on the fire. The resultant fireball is massive. It whooshes outward by about 10 feet in every direction, staying low to the ground, right under our camp chairs, and almost to my 4-year-old brother playing with newspapers nearby. Long story short, I'm afraid of my dad's stupidity.
That camping story is wild. Your dad must have thought he was a fire magician or something. It's crazy how things can go from chilled to chaotic in a second. I get the fear though. That kind of experience sticks with you. It's funny now, but probably wasn't so much at the time. Just goes to show how close calls can happen when you're just trying to enjoy a simple night out.
One time a few years ago, my family went on a long, 3-week road trip around the western parts of the U.S. I live in California, visiting and camping at as many national parks as we could. We drive up to a campground that's pretty empty and are cruising around the loop to look for a good campsite when we see a deer standing by one of the campsite fire pits. We stopped the car to take pictures and watched it for a while, and then it suddenly ran away. Then we noticed the campfire was smoking a little. Being a responsible person, my dad got out of the car to make sure the fire was out, and there were little hieroglyphic drawings / symbols on the charred logs and the rocks of the fire pit. TLDR, saw a deer, was probably a shape-shifting witch doctor.
That sounds like a memorable trip. Seeing a deer at a campsite is always cool. The whole idea of finding symbols around the campfire adds a bit of mystery to it. Your dad's responsible move to check the fire is classic. Those tiny moments can make a road trip special. It's funny to think about what might have been going on there. A shape-shifting witch doctor is an interesting twist to the story.
So me and my friends were at an old hydraulic gold mine. This is a giant scar about 2 miles, a quarter mile across, and 150 or so feet deep. Just a massive trench cut with high-pressure hoses. So fast forward to the evening, and we were done shooting and biking for the day, hanging around our fire. Suddenly from above us, we hear a shriek. Then a few seconds later, another from the other side. This went back and forth a half dozen times. The really freaky part was the fact that it clearly wasn't an echo, as the timing between was anywhere between 1 and 10 seconds. We get out of there first thing in morning and head to my buddy's house to find out via Google that there was a town there at one point that was washed away along with its graveyard through mining. Apparently it's haunted as fuck, and I guess I sort of believe it now.
That sounds like a wild experience. It's strange how places can hold so much history. Hearing those shrieks must have creeped you out. It's unsettling to think about a town and graveyard lost to time, especially in a spot like that. Makes you wonder who might still be around. I'd probably feel the same way about the haunting, too. It's one of those stories that sticks with you.
A man approached our site and told us we had to leave as we weren't allowed to camp there. We stayed anyways, and he left, but he stayed in the woods just about 300 feet away. Maybe it was because we were drunk, but we just ignored him. Anyways, come nighttime, I hear someone walking around our site, but ignore that as well. In the morning, everyone else confirmed they heard it, and we all thought it was one of us walking around. There were no footprints, which was odd, cause it had rained the day before and was muddy. The man was gone.
That's kind of creepy. You think you're safe when you're camping, but then something like that happens. It's easy to dismiss sounds in the night, especially if you're not sober. The whole no footprints thing adds to the weird vibe. Guess sometimes it's better to just stick to the rules, even if it seems unnecessary. Not having that guy around in the morning just adds to the mystery. Makes you wonder what really happened.
When I was a kid, my family and I would camp on a piece of property owned by relatives that overlooked a cove off the ocean. The ground was nice and level because an ice house, building where ice blocks were stored and loaded onto ships from, had stood on the property 100 years before. One night, we heard someone whistling loud enough to wake us all up, each person thinking that somebody in another tent was responsible. Only when we discussed it the next morning did we realize that it came from outside the tents. Nobody heard any footsteps. They're easy to hear over the leaf litter and fallen twigs. We credited to the ghost of one of the ice house workers, going about his day like it was still 1891 or something.
That sounds pretty eerie. I get how camping can bring out strange experiences. When we were kids, we also thought we heard stuff while camping. Sometimes it's just the wind or animals, but there's always that feeling of something more. Hearing a whistle in the night would definitely get me spooked. The idea of a ghost is just wild, imagining someone out there doing their job like it's still the past.
Maybe kind of late, but one night while camping far up in the mountains in TN, I crawled out of my tent to pee. As I'm crouching there, I start noticing the leaves of the plants near me seem to be moving. Waking up more, I realize there is no wind, no sounds. The moon was near full, and every leaf on every plant, tree, blade of grass turned very hand-like, and they were waving/flipping from back to front. I was kind of spooked, but felt a strange sense of happy forest energy. I watched for a while, then went back to sleep eventually. When I woke up in the morning, I remembered it and had a serious WTF moment. Super weird. No, I was not on drugs. Tongue sticking out.
That sounds like a pretty surreal experience. You're just trying to take a quick pee, and then the whole forest feels alive. It's funny how nature can freak you out sometimes, but also leave you feeling good. It's like the woods were doing their own thing, and you got to witness it. Those moments can stick with you, way more memorable than just another night camping.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.